Once upon a time, there was a reverend would who enjoyed walking around and visiting different parts of the country and different lands. And the reverend would travel all throughout the United States, spreading the gospel and sharing God's work and talking about the power of faith and belief and so on and so forth. As the reverend was making his journey out west, perhaps the reverend was on the way to Santa Barbara or something like that, the reverend was passing through Arizona and came to the spot in Arizona where it was nothing but desert. Now, has anybody in here ever been to Arizona or lived in Arizona? If you have, Arizona can get hot, really, really hot. And the reverend was traveling through the desert on a particularly hot day when he came upon, out in the distance, what looked to be one of the most beautiful gardens he had ever seen. The reverend realized that he must be hallucinating, and he quickly drank some water to try to calm himself and continued forward, only to come as he began to get closer and closer to realize it wasn't hallucination, it wasn't a mirage. What he was seeing with his own eyes was in fact real. And what he saw was this garden full of succulents, amazing plants of these vibrant, beautiful colors, fruit trees that were so lush and ripe and full of some of the most delicious looking fruit that he had ever seen on God's green earth. The Reverend was awestruck and marveled by this amazing creation, and he found himself wondering how could something so miraculous and such a miracle be found in the middle of a desert on such a hot day. At which point the Reverend looked up and saw this tiny house at the edge of the garden, which perked the Reverend's curiosity. He walked up to the house and began knocking on the door. That's my special effects I'm throwing in there. Began walking up to the door and he knocked. Eventually, a young man opened the door, to which the Reverend immediately spoke and said, "Young man, I've traveled far, and I must tell you, you've truly been blessed by God. To have such an amazing creation, such a bountiful crop out here in the middle of desert, you are truly in God's good favor." And the young man leaned forward and he spoke to the Reverend. He said, "Reverend, you're right. God has been very good to me. God has provided me with great seeds. God has provided me with the means to, sustain and cultivate this garden." And then the young man leaned a little closer and he said, "Reverend, I have to tell you something." And the Reverend said, "What's that?" And the young man looked at the Reverend and he said, "Reverend, you just should have seen what this land looked like before I got here. And it was when it was just under God's care." What's the moral of the story? What are you taking away from this? To me, my takeaway is, I hear people all the time say, trust in God, and you have to have faith, and God will provide. I fully believe that to be true. And I believe that God is a teammate in the sense that God is going to give us the potential to do and realize whatever we believe our potential is to do and realize. But for us to fully realize our potential, we have to put in the work to become who we can become being. Meaning that Michael Jordan would never be the Michael Jordan that we know if he hadn't put in the time to practice over and over again. Did God bless him with certain maybe genetic gifts? Absolutely. Did God bless him with the skill and ability? Absolutely. But Michael Jordan would have never tapped into that ability had he not have put in the work. And we can look at this across for all sorts of people, an Oprah Winfrey or J.K. Rowling or, J.K. Rowling, maybe we could say that God blessed her with the ability to be a wonderful storyteller. But if she had never put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, she would have never realized and become and awakened her full potential. Oftentimes, I think people mistake God's intention for them with a almost right to wait, meaning that they can sit idly by the sidelines and wait till God comes and says it's time to get in the game. I think, in my opinion, and what I take away from the story is, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too, or rather, I believe that God has already put you in the game. But it's just up to you if you want to play. And if you do decide to play, what level are you going to play at? Meaning, are you going to play at a level where you're realizing the full potential that you've been given? Are you going to play at a level that allows you to tap into the greatest assets you have, which is what's in here and in here? Are you going to play at a level that is one that's free from fear and the bondage of limiting beliefs that we hold ourselves back with, and instead choose to play at the level that you know deep down that you're capable of playing at? See, so many of us settle for less, and we might use the excuse, and sometimes I think we even pass on excuses to God, right? I will not, or I cannot, or I need to wait until God says it's time. What if God is speaking to you all the time? Sometimes we have those feelings of knowing, and knowing that we need to do more, or knowing that we're on the right path, or knowing we need to take the next step, or we need to step forward in the faith. But then we have those fear voices that start to pop up and talk us out of things. Perhaps God's speaking to you more than you realize. It's just you're not listening. Because if you were to listen, I bet you would step forward much more often and step forward with faith and step forward with purpose, as opposed to waiting for literally the lightning bolt to come and strike down at your feet and have it illuminate a big sign that says you need to do this. God's got a lot of responsibilities. And what is the expression, God works in mysterious ways? So perhaps sometimes God doesn't have the time nor the ability to make the lightning bolt sign telling you to do this. But what there is something in here. Something in there that if you choose to listen to, it can profoundly change your life.